move everything around a little bit. My name's Glenda Phipps, and I'm the room host for this series of authors. These also authors are all going to read and speak about books that are under the theme of the pressure to measure up. Okay? I'm going to introduce each of them individually now by name, but then give them a fuller introduction before they speak. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. Okay, so as things are coming up, you want to ask, hold those questions until the end. Okay, a couple of things I just want to tell you about the book fair. If you haven't already, we got a little hint. We are our 32nd anniversary of the fair. Who's here for the first time? First time. Ah, yeah. Okay, you guys are regular. They're here for the first time. Okay. So you know that this is an event that's been going on for many years. After they speak, there will be a chance to speak with them more individually and have the book signed out in the red area, and we'll show you where that is afterwards. We want to recognize always the people who support the book fair. The Bachelor Foundation, the Knight Foundation, and OHL Arellano, if you know that organization, who also are big supporters. And of course, Miami-Dade College. That's who I work for, and that's where we are. So we love Miami-Dade College, right?
Yes.
Yay, woo! Let's see, what else should I tell you? I think I've told you all. Let me go ahead and introduce everyone by name, and then we'll go with the first author. Go ahead.
I think there's students here who are going to present the authors.
There's what?
Yes.
There's two?
Who's the for this time for the 12? You are. She is.
Yeah, we know that one. Is there another person who was here?
Yeah, you have Dominique, you have Gabrielle, and you have Lena.
Those are not right now.
No.
The one for now.
Okay.
She's up.
Only her.
Okay.
Okay,
Sorry.
great. We've got that one organized. We're good with that. Okay. So the three authors that we have here, and maybe you can just wait so you know. Ann Haydu. Okay, there you go. Neal Schusterman. And I'm going to say it right.
You will.
Tamara.
You will.
Tamara. Ireland Stone. Okay. But our first author who's going to speak, Ann Haydu, actually has a special introductory person who wrote for her, Chelsea Barron.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Miami Book Fair. In 2013, Ann Haydu was chosen as one of the Publisher Weekly's Flying Stars. Her books have been Junior Library Guild selections, Indie Next selections, and BCB Blue Ribbon selections. Teaches YA novel writing with Media Bistro and adapted her debut novel, OCD Love Story, into a high school play, which had its first run in fall 2015. In Making Pretty, a New York City girl experiences the most intense summer of her life. In Rules for Stealing Stars, sisters discover a magical place that gives them what they truly need, an escape from the complications of their home life. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Ann Haydu.
Thank you, Chelsea. That was one of the best introductions I've gotten. So yeah, I'm Ann Haydu, and the book I'm here for today is Making Pretty, which is a book about two sisters who live in New York City, Montana, and Arizona. Their mom had a thing for mountainous states. And they have a mom who's sort of MIA and a father who is a plastic surgeon and has gone through a succession of a lot of different wives who act as stepmoms to the girls. And it's really a book about the complicated relationships a lot of girls and also boys have with their physical appearance, particularly during the teen years, and about the ways families shift. And it's also a book about first love, because you always want to have some of that in there too. So I'll read just a tiny amount, but yeah, it was an important topic for me to sort of dive into, something that I definitely struggled with as a teenager and still struggle with today, which it's always good for me to write books that are something I can really obsess about and think about a lot and are often something that's troubling me. So I wrote a book about something that was troubling me. And this is a little bit of a flashback scene. It'll just be a minute. Arizona turned 13 almost 2 years before me, but she didn't tell me about the 13th birthday gift until mine was presented by my dad and wrapped in fancy gold paper with a silver bow and a fake rose taped to the middle as extra decoration. I was pretty sure it was something shiny, like a necklace with my birthstone or the tiara I'd seen when I was out shopping with Natasha that Dad told me was ridiculous, but I insisted was perfect for all kinds of events. I used to like things like diamonds and glitter and princess costumes. I used to believe in things like birthdays and stepmoms. The present was a slip of paper, Dad's office stationery, and a promise that I could get any procedure I wanted when I turned 18. For confidence, he said. I don't get it, I said. I looked to Arizona for a translation, and she shrugged. Well, when I was 13, all I wanted to know was that I would be prettier when I was older, Natasha said, trying to explain away the confusion all over my face. She had a bad habit of saying things that were definitely insulting, but that she didn't spend any time thinking about, so were therefore somehow not meant to be mean. Oh, I said, because there is very little else to say to a gift certificate for future plastic surgery. You can get anything done, Dad said, like if you don't grow into your nose. Or I can't imagine you'd need lipo, but that would be fine too. Dad had been talking about me growing into my nose for years. It had never seemed that big to me. I got you a pet chameleon, Arizona exclaimed, right at the moment I thought all my insides were going to start pouring out of my eyes and nose. I thought I could maybe cry so hard and so long that I'd turn hollow eventually. You did? I said. Arizona was giving me our patented don't cry look, which we had perfected long, long ago when I was 5 and she was 7 and Mom left. I did, she said. That's what you wanted, right? She ran to her bedroom where I guess she'd been storing the little guy and brought him down in a glass cage with a book of instructions for feeding and cleaning and general chameleon care. Yes, I said, staring at his scaly face. This is what I wanted. If Mom had been around, maybe she would have remembered the chameleon too, but it didn't matter. I had Arizona for that. Dad was good at being around and not leaving and finding random women to live with us and asking us 1 million times a month if we were happy, even if he never explained quite what that meant. Arizona was good at filling in all the gaps that were left. And Mom was good at birthday cards and not much else. I loved that chameleon hard, and I named him Lester. I stopped wanting anything that glinted in the sun or was meant to make me prettier. I stopped wanting Natasha around. I keep my plastic surgery gift certificate in my desk drawer. I am positive I'll never use it, but I keep it as a reminder of something. I'm not sure what. I thought Arizona was doing the same thing. It's uneasy to be suddenly different from the person you thought you were exactly like. Dad's never mentioned it again, but I'm sure he's wondering how I'm going to use it, checking my face to catalog the ugliest parts and make suggestions. Meanwhile, my chameleon Lester died 2 years ago. They don't have very long lifespans, as it turns out. Changing themselves that often to fit every possible circumstance perfectly exhausts them, I guess. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I'm probably loud enough without this, but I'll try anyway. Okay. Our next reader is going to be Neal Schusterman. Neal Schusterman is the New York Times bestselling and award-winning author of Bruiser, which was a cooperative children's book center choice, a YALSA popular paperbacks for young adults pick, and was on 12 state lists. The Schwa Was Here and the Unwind series, among many other books. Challenger Deep, winner, and he was a finalist, but now it's a winner, for the 2015 National Book Award in Young People's Literature, is set on a galleon that's headed for the deepest point on Earth. Challenger Deep, the southern part of the Marianas Trench. A brilliant high school student battling schizophrenia is designated as the ship's artist in residence. He's split between his allegiance to the captain and the allure of mutiny.
Thank you. When I first started Challenger Deep, actually long before writing it, it was just a title. When my son Brendan was in second grade, he did an ocean report, and his report was about the Marianas Trench. And so we did a lot of research, and we discovered that the deepest place in the world, the bottom of the Marianas Trench, had been named Challenger Deep. And I thought, what a great name for the deepest place in the world. What a cool title for a book. And so I just had that in the back of my mind, Challenger Deep, the title for a book. I never had a story to go with it. Until many years later, 10 years later, when Brendan was about 16, he started to develop some anxiety issues. But it was a little bit more than anxiety. It started to get worse and worse. It became paranoia. It moved into delusions, believing things that weren't real. And ultimately, it moved into hallucinations, and finally, he was hospitalized and was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar. Now, schizophrenia and mental illness in general is very misunderstood. So I'll try to explain to you my understanding of what schizophrenia is, and it's basically your own brain chemicals are sending you on an acid trip, 24/7, constantly. You can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not real, and so that line between what's in your head and what's outside of your head is gone. And when you have nothing to focus your reality on, you can't tell what's real anymore. In the depths of the illness, when Brendan was really struggling, he said, "Dad, sometimes it's like I'm at the bottom of the ocean and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs and nobody can hear me." And suddenly I knew what Challenger Deep was going to be about. Couldn't write it then. We were in the depths of the deep with him, struggling with him to try to help him rise from it, and he did. Took a few years. You know, coming back from a mental break is a very difficult thing, but Brendan has an indomitable will, and with all the support of his family, of his friends, of his doctors, he made a miraculous recovery. Now, mental illness is something that you do have to struggle with your whole life, but he is doing great now. As a matter of fact, he's here with me today. And he was there with me earlier this week when I accepted the National Book Award, and it's been quite an amazing ride. But I want to read a little bit from Challenger Deep, just a little. I'm just going to read the first chapter, and Brendan is going to do some drawings. Now, when you look through the book, you'll see there's artwork throughout the book. This is artwork that Brendan did when he was in the depths, and it inspired the journey in the story. Everything that happens in the fantasy part of the story was all inspired by Brendan's artwork. So he's going to do an original artwork while I'm reading. Chapter 1, Fee Fi Fo Fum. There are two things you know. 1, you were there. 2, you couldn't have been there. Holding these two incompatible truths together takes skill at juggling. Of course, juggling requires a third ball to keep the rhythm smooth. That third ball is time, which bounces much more wildly than any of us would like to believe. The time is 5 a.m. You know this because there's a battery-powered clock on your bedroom wall that ticks so loudly sometimes you have to smother it with a pillow. And yet, while it's 5 in the morning here, it's also 5 in the evening somewhere in China, proving that incompatible truths make perfect sense when seen with global perspective. You've learned, however, that sending your thoughts to China is not always a good thing. Your sister sleeps in the next room, and in the room beyond that, your parents. Your dad is snoring. Soon your mom will nudge him enough to make him roll over, and the snoring will cease, maybe until dawn. All of this is normal, and there's great comfort in that. Across the street, a neighbor's sprinklers come on, hissing loud enough to drown out the ticking of the clock. You can smell the sprinkler mist through the open window, mildly chlorinated, heavily fluoridated. Isn't it nice to know that the neighborhood lawns will have healthy teeth? The hiss of the sprinklers is not the sound of snakes. And the painted dolphins on your sister's wall cannot plot deadly schemes. and a scarecrow's eyes do not see. Even so, there are nights where you can't sleep because these things you juggle take all of your concentration. You fear that one ball might drop, and then what? You don't dare imagine beyond that moment because waiting in that moment is the captain. He's patient, and he waits. Always. Even before there was a ship, there was the captain. This journey began with him. You suspect it will end with him. And everything between is the powdery meal of windmills that might be giants grinding bones to make their bread. Tread lightly or you'll wake them. Thank you.
Okay, our last reader is Tamara Ireland Stone. Tamara Ireland Stone is a former Silicon Valley marketing executive. She's the author of the young adult novels Time After Time and Time Between Us, which have been published in over 20 countries to widespread acclaim. Her latest book is Every Last Word. Is that the book you're reading?
It is, yes.
Every Last Word. Samantha McAllister looks just like the rest of the popular girls in her junior class. But Sam has a secret that her friends would never understand. Purely obsessional OCD. She's consumed by a stream of dark thoughts and worries that she can't turn off. Sam knows she'd be truly crazy to leave the protection of the most popular girls in school. When Sam meets Carolyn, she has to keep her new friend with a refreshing sense of humor and no style secret. Carolyn introduces Sam to Poets Corner, a hidden room in a tight-knit group of misfits who have been ignored by the school at large, and starts to discover a whole new side of herself. Slowly, she begins to feel more normal than she ever has as part of the popular crowd, until she finds a new reason to question her sanity and all she holds dear.
Hi. Thank you. Thanks for having me here. Such an honor to be on this panel with both of you, with all three of you. Thank you so much. So this story was inspired in many ways by a friend's daughter who is, I just have this connection to her I kind of can't explain. But I've known her since she was a toddler, and her mom is one of my closest friends, and we used to go to lunch together often, and she was telling me about her daughter when she was 11, 12, and her struggle with insomnia. And I also was struggling with insomnia, so I was kind of connecting with her in this new way that I hadn't before. And it wasn't just about kind of how she's doing in school and what's going on with her. Our conversations became more about this thing that was happening in her daughter's life that was really troubling her. And maybe 6 months later, the next lunch, she told me tearfully that her daughter had been diagnosed with OCD. And I kind of looked at her and thought, is she neat? Like, I didn't know she was especially neat. That's interesting. And I got my very first of many educations on what OCD actually is. And it all started to click and make sense when I started to listen to what her daughter had been going through. So the insomnia was the first sign, but it was an obsession with her thoughts. So OCD is not about an obsession with neatness and order. It's not about repetitive hand washing. It's not about checking your locks multiple times, although that's often part of the disorder. The root is the thought, what's going on in your mind, and the fact that you can't turn that thought off. So all these problems she'd been having with her friends at school, and the fact that she couldn't sleep, and all these things suddenly kind of clicked for her whole family, and for me. And I just couldn't imagine what life would be like being 12 and 13 and going through middle school. I mean, I remember being that age and questioning what my girlfriends said, and some innocuous comment would haunt me for a couple hours, like, what did she mean about my shoes? What's wrong with my shoes? But my friend's daughter was in a different place. She was so caught up in that spiral, and she just couldn't turn these thoughts off, and they got very dark and haunting. So I wanted to explore that in this story. One of the things that was interesting for me, I did a ton of research. I spoke not only with her at length and with her therapist and with 3 other therapists who were very helpful in educating me and helping me understand this disorder and representing it as well as I could. I'm never going to represent mental health accurately to everybody because it's so different for everyone, right? Your experience is going to be different no matter what. But I wanted to honor those people who were dealing with mental health challenges in their life. I wanted to also honor something that I thought her family had done really well, and it sounds like Neal and you also did this really well with Brendan. They took it seriously right away. They didn't explain it away. They didn't make her feel like there was something that she just kind of needed to fix by herself. They treated it like any kind of physical condition, and it is. So they found her a therapist right away. They found medication that didn't work at first, and more medication that didn't work, and then more medication that did. And they found outlets for her. In the story, I made Sam a swimmer because I personally love water. I find water really soothing to my mind. When it gets complicated and scary, I kind of go swimming, or I go get in a bath, or I get in the shower, or I go stand near a fountain. Water, for whatever reason, really works for my brain. So I gave Sam water, but my friend's daughter is an actress. Getting on stage where she's fearful of everything around her, and she kind of lives in this state of high anxiety about what people think about her, that all disappears when she stands up on stage under lights like this, which I find fascinating. So she has that as an outlet. What I didn't realize is I gave Sam a therapist who's amazing. They have a fantastic connection, because I wanted to make it clear that therapy's okay. Therapy's great if you need that, and there's nothing wrong with seeking out that kind of help. I wanted to say very clearly that medication is great if that's what you need, whatever you need. I wanted sports to be her outlet because I wanted to address that whole idea that if you're depressed, you just need to exercise more, because that's false. And then I gave her water. And then at some point, maybe halfway through the book, I found myself in a puddle of tears because I realized I was giving her another outlet. And I'd been doing it since chapter 2, and I didn't even realize it. I gave her a pen and a notebook. And I had been teaching her for the first half of the book how to write down what she was feeling and let that be part of her healing. So the story is about a girl who has OCD. I don't think it's about a girl with OCD. I think she happens to have OCD. She's managing it very well, but she's also not in some ways, until she meets Caroline. And Caroline introduces her to Poet's Corner, this secret room. And I love being in this room because it's all black. This kind of reminds me of Poet's Corner. It's hidden underneath the school theater. It's where they store all the props and other things that nobody really looks at much. But it's been there for 10 years, and the way it works is you stand on stage, you read your poetry aloud, and then someone in the room tosses you a glue stick. And you glue the back of your poem and slap it up on the wall. So picture this room, all black, but the walls are alive with words, covered in Snickers wrappers and coffee cups and Post-its, and anything you can write on are just papering the walls. So when Sam walks into this space, which is supposed to feel kind of chaotic and not the kind of place her brain would like, she feels the same kind of peace she does in the pool. So I just want to introduce you to Poet's Corner. It's a really short chapter. She has an obsession with the number 3, so everything is 3 words, and all the titles are 3 words that are taken from the text. So this is titled, Let Everything Go. I spend the rest of 6th period and all 7th reading the walls of Poet's Corner. The poems here are silly, heartbreaking, hilarious, sad, and many are absolutely incredible. They're about people who don't care enough and people who care too much, people you trust and people who turn on you, hating school, loving your friends, seeing the beauty in the world. Sprinkled among them are heavier ones about depression and addiction, self-mutilation, and various forms of self-medication. But most of them are about love, wanting it, missing it, actually being in it. I read some of those twice. None of the poetry is marked with anything that makes its author identifiable, aside from the fast food wrappers, which appear to be Sydney's trademark. Hard as I try, I can't find the ones Caroline penned. But AJ's proved to be fairly easy. As soon as I found that first song, I had no trouble finding more of his right slanted, narrow handwriting. By the time the final bell rings, I've read hundreds of poems. As eager as I am to say I've covered every square inch of this place, I've already been down here for over an hour. AJ's sitting at the table, waiting for me to return, and I still have a poem of my own to write. My backpack is sitting in front by the couch, so I take a seat and thumb through my notebooks. I skip the red one because I'm not angry, and the blue one because I'm not thinking about the pool. The poem that's building inside of me is a yellow one. My head falls back into the cushions, and I let my gaze travel around the walls one more time before I take the pen to paper. I tap it 3 times, then I let everything go.
So we have some time to take any questions from the audience to any of the writers. Any questions?
Don't be shy.
Well, I have some questions.
Okay, good.
I'm curious to know how everybody started writing.
You want to start?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
I was sort of a lifelong writer. My background is in acting, but I was sort of writing the whole time while I was saying I was going to go into an acting career. I started keeping journals when I was 8 years old, and I have a huge trunk of them in my apartment, which I'm in a tiny New York City apartment, so it's taking up like half of my apartment. And that was sort of how I began, just needing. I didn't grow up in the best family situation, and so writing was really an escape for me, and the journals were really the only safe place that I had. So yeah, that was how I fell in love with it, and I was from a family of readers as well, so of course a lot of time was spent reading. But that using it as an escape, and then later using it as a place to imagine other stories and to tell my story and to tell variations on my story, and like I said, to sort of address things that are troubling me, is sort of how that began. But yeah, originally it was just sort of a passionate place I could escape into, and later it became more of a career pursuit and something I wanted to really spend that time in.
My story is very similar. I also didn't grow up in a great family situation, and we moved 8 times in 12 years, so I was kind of always the new kid and always making new friends and feeling like I didn't belong ever. So my notebooks was the place that I kind of worked all that out. Never let anyone read my poetry, probably thank goodness, because it was terrible, or my short stories or my journal entries, and it didn't matter because it was all for me anyway. I didn't need anybody to read it. And then I got married and had kids and had a fantastic job and got happy, and I stopped writing in my journals for probably 10 years, almost 10 years. I stopped writing. I wrote for business every day, and that was enough. It was feeding that need to write, but it wasn't feeding the need to write. It was a completely different kind of writing. And so I started, I told myself one day, like, I want to write again. I want to make this an important priority. And I started writing, and turned out to be my first book, Time Between Us. I just wrote it in all the spare time I could find. I was kind of obsessed with it. I had to get the story on paper. And I wrote instead of watching TV. I wrote instead of sleeping. The insomnia thing plays a role in this as well, as you can imagine. So yeah, I just kind of wrote and fell in love with writing all over again.
I think I really first started writing when I was in 9th grade. I had a great 9th grade English teacher who challenged me to write a story a month for extra credit. And since I needed extra credit in English, I took her up on this challenge, and by the end of 9th grade, I felt like a writer. But what really got me writing for teens was when I was a counselor at summer camp. My first year, my first job that I ever had when I was 18, and I kind of got to be known as a camp storyteller. And I just made up stories every night, and I really prided myself on being the storyteller, because there's kind of a power to a storyteller, Yeah. I could walk into any cabin. Once I got known as a storyteller, I could walk into any cabin on the entire campus, and the kids would fall silent before me because they knew that they had 5 seconds to be quiet, or I'd tell the story somewhere else. And so there was a sense of power. And I could walk into a room and command absolute silence just by my presence in the room. And it was so much fun.
That's great.
But I had to make up stories. And the kids would always say, you know, why don't you write those stories into books? I would read it. And so my first year at college, I spent my free time working on a novel that I was going to bring back the next summer and have, you know, the bound copy of this book that I wrote based on the story that I had. And I took all the money that I made from that summer job and used it to try to send it out to publishers, you know, to make Xerox copies and postage. All the money I made went to Xerox copies and postage, sent it off to 30 different publishers, and guess what? Nobody bought it. Could not sell my first book. Did the same thing with the second one, also based on a story. Couldn't sell it. The third one is the one that sold. And there's a good reason why those first two didn't sell. They were awful. But I had to write them. You know, I had to write the first one to be a good enough writer to write the second. I had to write the second to be a good enough writer to write The Shadow Club, which was my first published novel. And that's kind of how I got started writing.
Yeah, I also have one of those unfinished or finished but never published manuscripts. That was my first one out in the world. And when people ask sort of what the advice you give young writers is, it's to keep writing even when it's not going well. Because I wrote O City Love Story, my first novel, I wrote while I was in the process of getting all those rejections and all that disappointment, was when I was able to write a book that was going to sell.
Yeah, and also rewriting.
Yeah.
Revision. You know, there's people who I've spoken to who say, "Oh, I just write one draft. When I'm done, I write it, and that's it." And it's no, it's all about the revision process.
That adage, writing is rewriting.
So it's
Writing
real.
is rewriting.
It's real.
Never good the first time.
Yeah.
Yes.
The question sounded great in my head, and now it's just gone. But I was going to ask you, how do you write? Do you see the entire book? Do you see chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, the beginning, the middle, the end? How does it come together to be a book?
That's a great question. For me, I see things in scenes, which is a strange way to write a book, but it's often how I do it. I write the scene I feel like writing that day because it's stuck in my head and I just need to get it out. And sometimes it doesn't even live in the final book. It's just something I needed to write to inform this character or this moment or something. It needed to be written. So yeah, I just write in scenes. Scenes come to me, and that's when I'm drafting. After it's all one complete draft, then I tend to go beginning to end. But I know how the book starts, I know how it ends, I know what happens kind of roughly in the middle, but I tend to write in chunks. I call them Lego blocks, and then I just kind of piece them together and hope they look like something that looks kind of like a building.
I tend to write very linearly. And just, I know where it starts, I know where it ends, and I'm, like you said, mostly know what's happening in the middle, but it changes. But I have always found it very difficult to jump ahead and move around, except for Challenger Deep. This book was a very different process. The story, just to give you a little bit of a background about the structure of the story, there's two different worlds the story is taking place in. The real world, in which the character of Caden, who's the main character, is developing this break from reality and ultimately has to be hospitalized. But parallel to that, and jumping back and forth, Caden is on this pirate ship, and he's going across the ocean to explore the Marianas Trench, and it's a very surreal, dreamlike trip. And in the course of the story, we realize that that's the delusion, and it's all going to sort of blend together, and the real world and this pirate ship are going to blend. Now, everything that happens on the pirate ship was inspired by artwork that Brendan did when he was in that state. This one, what was this one called again, Brendan?
Stars Are Right.
The Stars Are Right. When I looked at this, what I saw was a character, a person leaping off the bow of a ship, like the figurehead of a ship coming to life and springing forth. And that inspired the idea of what if this is a ship sailing across the ocean. And every image in the book inspired something. I'll have to find the brain. If you can find that. Here, Brendan, do you think you can find?
Yeah.
You can find that one. But there was, just taking these images and then creating bits and pieces of story around it. And the chapter that I read was very short. There's 161 chapters in the book, and some of them are just a paragraph. And it was just and there were times when I was like, had an envelope in my pocket, and I thought of something, and I wrote on the back of the envelope, and then shoved it in my briefcase. It was just little pieces, and I didn't know how they were all going to fit together. Now this one, Brendan drew this one like this.
I think that one is called Grapes of Thrash. Or what was that?
Grapes of Thrash, something like that.
Yeah.
And and I turned it upside down and said, that looks like a brain that's running away. And I thought of the idea of feral brains. And on the deck of the ship, you know how ships will have rats. There's no rats on this ship. There are these feral brains that have escaped from sailors' heads that are running around the ship that they're trying to catch. And that was inspired by this image. And every little snippet of a chapter it was a puzzle piece. And when I had enough of them, I started to put them together and see what order they would fall in. And very different structural writing process than anything that I'd ever written. And when I turned it into my editor, I had no idea whether or not it worked. You know, it seemed to me that the puzzle pieces kind of finally came together, but I had no idea until I had somebody else tell me.
We need that, don't we?
Yeah, we need someone to tell us.
So did you write sorry, okay, one clarifying question. Did you write the whole thing then once you had all those puzzle pieces together? Did you do one pass through the real world and one pass through
once I put everything together, then I went through it to make sure that both worlds worked.
Right.
And when they started to merge, it all kind of made sense.
That's great.
But it was a challenge, and without any distance, I didn't know whether or not it worked. So until I had someone tell me.
Someone else to tell you.
Yeah, we do need that.
Final question.
Since each of the books primarily address youth, do you feel as though you have an obligation perhaps to, pass on a certain message, or is it more so just for your storytelling?
Yeah, so we spoke about this a little bit earlier, you and I, but I don't feel an obligation to teach a lesson to kids. I think that that's the job of parents and teachers and the people in their life that are really there. And I think a book can be a great catalyst for conversations that will lead to those more sort of lessons about how to live. The only obligation I feel is to honesty. I'm not interested, for me, in writing books that are kind of pretending things are different than they are. And that does often mean that the books I write have challenging material and have material that is uncomfortable and, content. I do write those things because I think they're the things that are happening in the world around kids and teenagers, and that it's a book is a really safe place to explore difficult issues, and you're really lucky if the primary place you're exploring those issues is in a book, because a lot of kids are finding those issues in their real lives. But yeah, so I don't feel an obligation to sort of be a moral example. But I do feel an obligation, since we're talking about teens, is to be honest, because I do think some of the books that I was reading when I was a teenager, when YA wasn't really a thing yet, didn't have that seed of honesty. I couldn't find myself in the books, and I couldn't. It's like, is life supposed to be like way easier than what I'm experiencing? It seems like it's much easier for them, and I would never want to make a kid feel that way, to feel like, why is it so easy here and so hard, in where I am? So yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't want to write messagey books, because when I was a teen, if you told me this is a messagey book, I would never have read it. But I'm always trying to say something. I mean, I hope this book inspires teens to pick up a pen and write. I hope it inspires them to look at the people around them through a more sympathetic lens and realize that everyone's dealing with something and you have no idea what's going on with them. So just be kind always. And that there's no such thing as normal. So if you're looking around wondering why you're not the normal ones, because everyone's looking around wondering why they're not the normal one, there's no such thing. And we're all kind of a little crazy. We all have a little something that Sam's big fear is that she's crazy. Okay, well, maybe, but we all think we're crazy in some way. We all have these weird things about us, and that's part of the human experience.
I was once on a panel, and I actually got into a fight on a panel. Not a fist fight, just an ideological fight.
A words fight.
Yeah, about one author said that it's all about story, and you must be true to the story, and that's all that matters. And I said, that's absolutely wrong. You have to be true to the reader. And I think that's a different. And that was an adult author. And I think there's a difference between adult authors writing for adults and writing for kids and teens. In that perhaps in the adult world it's about the story. In the young adult world, it's about the reader. And honesty and perspective. Those are the two most important things. when people ask me what the moral of my book is, I kind of get a little uncomfortable because I think that it's all about asking the questions, not giving the answers. And the only questions worth asking are the ones that aren't easy to answer. And I don't want to pretend to know the answers. What I want to do is I want to be able to create a canvas in which you can see the questions more clearly,
Yeah.
and
Well
to
said,
create
well said.
perspective.
Well said.
And hopefully when you read all of these books, you'll have a new sense of perspective on the lives of the characters in them and on your own life.
Okay, all right, let's thank all three authors. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. They will be signing their books out in the red area, and yeah, you can take it there. So thank you so much.
Would you like to take? And Brendan's going to give his work to someone in the audience.
Thank you so much.